Gate, gate, paragate.
You are listening to the Therapeutic Astrology Podcast by Mannah, but with a slightly different intro music. This is the voice of our guest today, author Ruthie Smith. Today I'm delighted to speak to her about her new book, Energy, Soul Connecting and Awakening Consciousness. Psychotherapy in a New Paradigm, published by Karnak Books. Ruthie is also an attachment-based psychoanalytic psychotherapist who is passionate about energy psychotherapy and its amazingly helpful transformative methods. And currently she is the director of a training program teaching energy psychotherapy to counsellors and psychotherapists. You'll meet her in a bit. Now just enjoy this piece of chanting. All right, welcome Ruthie Smith, and thank you for the chant.
A pleasure. Such a pleasure.
This is just one of the ways of working with energy in an alchemical way with chanting that you've written about in your book. But I thought to ask you about the whole term mind-body energy, to explore that a little bit, because you use that to acknowledge the multidimensional aspects of being human. Mind-body energy.
Yes, yes. Well, I think that in the quantum paradigm that we're moving into, it's expanded our whole remit, really. And so we're looking much more broadly at the greater whole and our relationship with the universe. And so within the context of that, therapy is no longer just about psychological talking. Obviously, I'm a psychotherapist, I've been working as it for years, but when I first started working as a therapist, the body wasn't included in therapy at all, and neither was subtle energy. And we know that psychotherapists explored the mind a great deal, but it spent relatively little time on the body and energy. And of course, the body and energy includes spirit and consciousness. So the new kind of neurobiological approaches over the last years or so have recognized trauma and, the famous quote from Van der Kolk, the body holds four. And so in this era, we're concerned about synergy between matter, mind, consciousness. About energy, we're thinking in terms of frequency and vibration. And that's what's operating within the unified quantum field. And energy creates a really invaluable bridge between psyche and soma. And experientially and evidentially, work with subtle energy, working with the nervous system, with the meridians and the chakras, facilitates the interconnection between mind and body, and it releases stress from the body and the mind and all the emotions in very easy ways and helps us to come to a place of peace. So that's why I use the term mind-body energy, because they're working synergistically together. And we use the term ease and grace when we talk about getting into the flow of these methods, because as the energy flows, it harmonizes the body. And we get ourselves out of this fight, flight, survival states into the ground of our being. So now, if I come on to multidimensionality, in this new paradigm, we're exploring what we call the Great Awakening. And this awakening from 3D, our egoic consciousness, to the heart state of fifth dimensional consciousness. And in this process, our frequency, our energetic frequency is being raised. So we start to encounter the idea of multidimensionality in the quantum field, because in the point of zero point, where past, present, and future all coexist in the present moment, You may be familiar with Eckhart Tolle, who calls this the power of now, where we exist in several dimensions simultaneously. And although we might not be aware of this, undoubtedly, we have many facets of ourselves all present simultaneously. So how is that affecting therapy? Well, it means that we're working in multidimensional ways. So, for example, in the old days, you used just to come to therapy and sort of talk about stuff. But in this way of working with energy psychotherapy, we're working with clearing trauma out of the body-mind energy. So we can clear trauma from current life. We can clear pre-verbal trauma, including the traumas that happened when we were, in conception or in utero or birth and infancy. We can clear attachment and developmental trauma during early life, again, during those pre-verbal states. We can clear transgenerational and ancestral trauma and cultural trauma and past life trauma, or some people call it parallel lives, and transpersonal trauma. So it creates a much broader field of multidimensionality. Would you like to say a little bit more about the dimensions?
I want to say that I really, really love your work and appreciate it so much. I just want to put that in there before we continue. And I just want to say how important of a book this is, because you're connecting what many of us are doing, and you're giving it a term, energy psychotherapy. And I usually refer to modern trauma therapy. But when I read your book, I'm like, this is what I'm trying to say in a way. This is the ancient knowledge being bridged into contemporary, modern, the ways of healing, ways of doing therapy. And so I find myself under that umbrella term, also with therapeutic astrology. And I find myself in that, even if we talk about a method like internal family systems would be in there, neuroaffective model would also be under there. And so some of the things that I'm already doing is you're describing it and you're explaining what's going on. So it's such an important book.
Thank you.
Yes, it's really, it's a masterpiece.
I so appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Yeah. And so definitely I want to hear more about the dimensions. And I just want people to hang in there, because this is so good. And there's so much that we're going to talk about. And we already decided to do one more. So this is going to be about the first part of your book. It is more about the philosophy and also your journey with it. And then the second part is more of the how. How do you do that in practice? So that's going to be a cliffhanger for now. But definitely let me know more about the dimensions you were going into.
Okay. Well, there's this thing called the shift where, we're entering into the Aquarian age, which you will be very familiar with. And it's opening us up to new dimensions, which all have their own laws. And broadly, the book's about the vibrational nature of perception, because our view of life changes depending on which dimension we're inhabiting. So what is a dimension? It's actually related to a specific bandwidth of frequencies. It's like a level of consciousness. So everybody views the world through their own lens, and we can only see through the lens that we've actually realized ourselves. So if somebody's operating at very high frequencies, like a fully enlightened being, for example, we can't really perceive them because we're operating at a lower frequency. It's a bit like a dog whistle. Dogs can hear whistles that humans can't. So it's all about frequency, and our perception is at the level of our frequency. And so it's quite an important issue in therapy, actually, because if a client's coming from a very, let's say you as a therapist are coming from a heart level and really open, and the client's coming from a lower vibration where they're perceiving issues about power and competition, they're not going to perceive your heart opening out to them, they're going to sort of think you're weak and wimpy because you're not doing power at them. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
So that's just an example of how important it is for us to know about the dimensions, but that basically there are at least 12 key dimensions or levels of consciousness, and actually many more. You know, probably infinite, but those are the 12 dimensions that we talk about largely. And as a soul incarnated on Earth and this planet, we have the capacity to inhabit at least 12 dimensions simultaneously. So it's like our higher self is operating somewhere, and, you know, some ascended master that we've got a connection with. We're all kind of multi-dimensional beings, and we're unlikely to be conscious of the other levels that we exist on. But the fact of the matter is we are existing on many levels. And so
I could have a question for that, because in my mind I'm like, oh, trying to relate it to, I mean, is this the different parts of us, or are you talking about here the David Hawkins scale of consciousness, where there are different emotions that vibrate differently? Or how am I to place this, that I'm multidimensional? Yeah, but is it my emotions? Is it different parts of me, or are we talking parallel lives where I'm doing something completely else and I feel that, you know, I can feel into that if I want to?
yes, so the frequency scale is very much about human beings here on Earth and how we can rise up the scale to enlightenment. But the level of the frequencies on the 12 dimensions is much higher than Hawkins's scale.
Okay.
But basically, we operate at different levels. So when we're in our 3D egoic mind, we're operating below the level of the heart. We're operating, if you think in terms of the chakra system, we're operating on the fight, flight, survival levels of the first three chakras. And then when we get to the heart, which in Hawkins states of consciousness is 500 and above, and then as we get higher, we move up to 1,000, which is said to be enlightenment, isn't it? So there's quite a long way to get to enlightenment. And most of us are operating, you know, in the lower scales of the first three chakras. But what's really exciting about this time is that gradually humanity is beginning to access the dimension of the heart. And so we're going into what's called the fifth dimension, because the heart and love and soul is the fifth dimension of the awakened state of consciousness, where we recognize our interdependence with one another, and no one's better than another. We've gone beyond all that competition and all that stuff, and we're into the humanitarian Aquarian age, where, you know, nobody can benefit at another's expense. And so we're all wanting to help and collaborate. So we're moving out of that sort of age of individual competition and, you know, sort of fighting for place to we all want to help and support and share in one another's growth and development. So it's this major shift into the heart level center. And obviously the 3D level, our egoic level, is based on Newtonian physics, cause and effect, duality, whereas quantum mechanics is beyond that. And that's when we become really multidimensional. But it's not a sort of, it's like we're up and down. We don't sort of just move to the fifth dimension and stay there. And that's why I call it in my book the roller coaster of awakening. We might have a glimpse of enlightenment, and then we crash right down to the bottom when we encounter some circumstance in life where we're really struggling and on the ground. And that's where the emotions that you mentioned earlier, it's through our emotions and our experiences that we elevate our consciousness. So, for example, in the scale of Hawkins that you mentioned, shame resonates at 20 and guilt at 30. So when we sort of have a horrible experience and we feel shame, we plunge right down to the bottom of the scale. So it is a roller coaster. So, but one of the things about multidimensional. In quantum reality, everything's going on simultaneously in the present moment. And I'd just like to read this quote from Corey, who says, when we speak of past lives or ancient civilizations, from our perspective, we're actually describing an entire panorama of simultaneous experience. So, and it's no different when we speak of the future. So what we perceive as a string of chronological lifetimes and fixed events is actually simply consciousness manifesting at different coordinates in the time-space continuum.
Wow.
It is quite wow, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's multidimensional. I thought that was a really good definition. But as we awaken, we start to have more access because the veils are thinning, the veils of ego are thinning. And so we start to, some people experience their past lives or their parallel lives, and they start bleeding through into this life. And so if we've got a deeply entrenched pattern, like victim consciousness, for example, the chances are that the same experience that we're experiencing today, let's say being bullied in some situation and being bullied and shamed, may well have happened many, many times in other lifetimes. And the thing about multidimensional healing is that we can clear energetically that pattern which repeats. Freud called it repetition compulsion, so that then we clear that dense frequency out of our system through using subtle energy methods. And out of that, then that helps to raise our vibration and bring more light into our bodies. Does that make sense?
It really does. And I'm so happy to be here in alignment with what you're talking about. Not that not that I've achieved anything, but just that I'm with you in a different way, because I've been doing interviews for many years. Before this one, I've done it in Denmark, and people have talked to me about energy psychology, but I've been curious. So I've had parts of me who maybe resonated with it, but what I'm thinking and what I've been thinking as I've read your book is how we, maybe each of us, I have at least, have had a prison around me, right? And so I've been thinking, why can other people just go into energy psychology already in their 20s? And I had to go to my late 30s for this to really be real for me. I think because we have different prisons in a way.
Yes,
They,
absolutely.
they
Different blockages.
yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, it has really been programmed. Everything that I've been doing with yoga and all of my journey, all of that has been completely shamed. And like there was a program around it that said it was, yeah, not working, not rational, um,
Yeah.
from a strange religion, whatever it is. So of course, for me, it's taken a while to get here. And so
Yeah.
that's why I'm really with you on so many levels, both with your book coming in at this place in time, and with the astrology matching what you're saying, and this shift you're talking about, how I feel it personally. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes, it is amazing, isn't it? People are feeling it. We really are waking up as a planet, and it's just so much lighter. So much lighter.
Did I give people maybe a quote around that from your book? Is it okay?
Yes, please do.
So this is from the beginning of your book, where you say, as we live through this shift, we are witnessing the breakdown of outworn structures and hierarchies all over the world, while at the same time, prophets have foretold that humanity is giving birth to a humanitarian golden age where new technologies and methods are manifesting in the service of the well-being of the planet. I see energy psychotherapy as one of these new methods. So this is what has been foretold, and this is one of the ways of doing that, bringing us there. It's just what
Yes,
you're saying.
absolutely. And that obviously with the Aquarian age, Uranus is the great awakener, as you know only too well. But Uranus is bringing on all these modern advanced technologies, some which we are happy about and some which we may be slightly worried about, like AI and things like that. Is it good or bad? How are we going to manage with that? But that's another thing that I had in my book that unfortunately had to be taken out of the book, because I had a whole chapter on the new Aquarian technologies. So there are things like free energy, which presumably you know about. So they've known for years, more than 100 years, how to create cars directly drawing from the ether without using any oil, any gas, not needing any resources other than from the ethers. I had a picture that I was going to put in my book of a 1920s car, which literally ran off the ethers. And then there's free energy. And so there doesn't have to be any energy crisis. It's just that the big business have been making money. So what's going to happen with the Aquarian age is that we're going to start being able to have the benefits. You probably heard of Nikola Tesla, who
Yeah.
talked about the importance of frequency and vibration. And Tesla had painted in loads and loads of fantastic technologies. And there's something called med beds. Have you heard about med beds?
I don't think so.
They're medical beds which are based on high frequency technology. I have pictures of these where people can regrow limbs. It's a bit, did you ever watch Star Trek?
Yeah.
Oh, so in Star Trek, when they have all these amazing things and people lie down and then something happens and suddenly they're better because of anyway, it's like Star Trek. They've got all these things like replicators. In Star Trek, you'd go to the replicator and say, please give me some chicken soup, and it would just materialize. They actually have those technologies already.
But this is great, and I believe you because I know the astrology. I know what's coming up, but I don't know. I don't know what is coming up. I know the
Yes.
theme of it. So it's into the what we can't really imagine at the moment. You say we have it, but it's at least it's not in it's not public, and so it makes sense in a way that we can't even publish a book about it. We have to take that out because we're not there yet, sort of, right? It's the future you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in that context, then energy psychotherapy I see as one of the tools we've been given to speed up the process of therapy. So it doesn't have to be such hard work. I mean, maybe you don't have to sit in therapy for 8, 10, 12 years, kind of talking about your stuff, but you can clear the trauma and feel much better, much quicker.
So this is where your background becomes relevant for the listeners to know that you started in psychoanalysis, right?
Yes,
And
yes,
that's much more of a long-term thing.
yes. I started out in psychoanalytic therapy many years ago, in 1975, I think. And my family were really suffering a lot. My sister had schizophrenia, was very, very ill. My mother was also psychotic. So I went into therapy very young, and I started out in psychoanalytic therapy, which was a lifesaver for me at the time. But I was so traumatized. I was quite dissociated and disconnected from my body. Nonetheless, and I was frozen in silence for a lot of the time in therapy, um, just really traumatized. I couldn't put words to things. But in those days, we didn't know about trauma. We didn't know about the nervous system. That didn't exist. And it wasn't until later on, when there was more research and understanding about the nervous system and all the work of Alan Shaw and Van der Kolk and, The Body Keeps a Score, and the other one, Babette Rothschild, we began to understand that actually the cingulate gyrus gets frozen. You can't think, you can't find words, you're just frozen in trauma. But now that's just standard. Everybody in therapy now knows about the nervous system and about the importance. But so when I started, it was just talking therapy. And I think that the suffering of my sister was so intense. She was beautiful. She was an absolutely beautiful soul. And very sadly, she did eventually commit suicide. And so I was on this sort of journey trying to find some kind of healing that could help, because talking therapy clearly was very, very slow. And I went to a Buddhist teaching. My partner, who'd introduced me to, I used to play music with him, and he was a Buddhist. He took me to my first Buddhist teaching, and I had an awakening experience where I just completely opened my heart. And the teacher was teaching about the suffering nature of humanity, and that there's a way out of that through awakening. And it was so profound. My heart really opened. I cried literally for 4 hours. And I had this experience of light in my body. I suddenly really connected with my body. And I realized that I was light. And it was so profound. And I realized that I was an okay person. It was the first time I had an experience where I thought, this is who I really am. Whereas I'd been kind of grown up in a shame, blame, judgment sort of family where I thought I was a terrible person, basically. And I think that was an absolute game changer in terms of psychotherapy, because instead of thinking, I'm a bad person, I've got to try terribly hard to get better, it's more about we're fundamentally good. Buddhism talks about our innate light nature, our Buddha nature. And equally, if we're a Christian, it would be Christ consciousness. I'm not wanting to sort of be a Buddhist here. I mean, it's a universal experience that we all have this nature, which is light. And so the whole paradigm shifts from, rather than trying hard to be good enough and get better, we're already good, but we need to clear the obscurations and blockages which prevent the sun from shining. We need to clear the clouds of our emotions which distort and get in the way, so we can't see our true nature.
Oh man. Oh, I'm really enjoying what you're talking about. And I'm with you with growing up in shame, if you will. And it's so wild to realize that that is what it was, right? It's like, wow, that tone that I've been with, that color almost, and
Yeah.
distortion that I've been with all of my life is, oh, that's, I remember when the word shame got, at least, and I don't know if it had been so common before, but then it got one more wave of being common, getting up into the public. And I was like, oh, that's what I've been feeling, right?
Yeah.
Um,
It's so debilitating, shame, isn't it? You're on the floor with shame. I mean, when the Hawkins scale says it's 20 on the scale, whereas enlightenment is 1,000, you're literally on the ground. You want this earth to swallow you up, don't you?
yeah, yes. And it's so central because it's related to what you're saying about that we work from there's something wrong with me rather than I'm already innate whole. I am wholeness. I'm wholeness, but
Yes.
I've been disconnected from that, and I think that's also what you say about that you found in Buddhism that they were talking about the root of suffering as being disconnected.
Yes,
Is that correct?
absolutely. Disconnected from our true nature.
Yeah.
And that's why this great awakening is so important, because we're getting out of this illusion of ego, which we sort of see as a solid self, but is just an illusion, and waking up into our true nature, which is that we are beings of light. And some people talk about this shift as being from Homo sapiens to Homo luminous. We're becoming our light beings, and we're learning to inhabit our light bodies. And we do so through the heart. And that's where that heart chakra chant that you play at the beginning, that is the chant which is the awakening of the heart chakra, where we open out into the vast spaciousness of the true nature of emptiness, but it's not an emptiness. It's like the vast expanse where we connect with the quantum field, if that makes sense. And it's spaciousness and light and compassion and pure energy.
Just a moment to take that in, because it's big stuff, right? I'm having images like how we all connect in light or something. But is this what you call the resetting of planetary energy to the fifth dimension? Is that what you're talking about with?
Yes, well, so in this shift, we're coming to the end of, and you'll probably know about this as an astrologer, but we're at this right now, at this moment in time, we're coming to the end of so many cycles. There's the end of a 26,000 year cycle. I think Ishmael Perez talked about us coming to the end of some billion-year cycles, but I can't remember that. But 12,000 year cycle, 5,000 year cycle, which is the Kali Yuga, the 2,000 year going out of Pisces into Aquarius. All that is happening exactly at the same time. So it's just a pivotal node, and that's why they call it the shift. And so, this is birthing a new world. And as we do this, we're transforming all our experiences and imprints from the old world and releasing the dense energy that doesn't serve us anymore. And were you familiar with that film called The Matrix?
Yes.
It's exactly like The Matrix. We're awakening out of the Matrix, which is a metaphor of egoic consciousness, and opening out into a new world. So basically, as the Earth experiences these profound energetic changes, the major planets throughout the universe and even multiverses are all becoming aligned, and they're bringing in powerful energies which have been stabilizing the fifth dimensional timeline. So at the time of this, we're currently in two accessible collective timelines, as the 3D and the 5D. And so as all this energy is changing around the entire universes, I should say, and our Earth, it's raising the vibration of all sentient beings and people's souls. We're starting to awaken to this change. And as long anybody who's choosing to enter a path which is at least 51% service to the other will be on the path of ascension. And that's very kind, isn't it? We've only got to be halfway over.
Yeah, 51%. Great.
And so we're gradually moving in, as a planet, we're moving into the fifth dimension. And so our clients who come to therapy will be experiencing these energies in various ways. So it's really appropriate, I think, as therapists and counselors to be aware of this shift in consciousness, because some people are really waking up and they're accessing different timelines and having multidimensional experiences, and they're not going mad, they're just entering into visionary states. And so, I mean, during this process of what's called ascension or awakening, some people are completely asleep. Some are so strongly attached to their egos and 3D that they choose, if you like, not to ascend, and they prefer to remain stuck in fear. And some people are choosing to ascend and be on the 5D timeline. And as we do that, we shift out of this state of illusion and wake up from this illusion of ego and into the heart-centered consciousness of wisdom and compassion. Toller calls it this conscious connection with universal intelligence, or another word for it is presence. The thing about presence is that it's consciousness without thought. So we're getting beyond the cognitive thinking into that space of being. And, you know, this glimpse of unity consciousness where we're united with the field, the wider field, is absolutely universal. Anybody can have this experience. You haven't got to be a Buddhist or a Christian or an anythingist. It's a universal human experience, which I learnt about most through Dzogchen. But what's so interesting is that when we work with energy psychotherapy, as it helps to release the dense frequencies of our trauma, it helps us access some of these states of being, bring us to those states of peace.
I should take notes. I hope people out there taking notes. Because I'm having one thing and then you say something else. But let's come back to Dzogchen that you just mentioned there.
Yes.
In a little bit, but just to all of what you said, I had some questions like, so you're talking about presence. Can I be present here and on other levels? If I am multidimensional, doesn't it mean that I'm not only here in this body?
Yes, absolutely, it does. It means you are here in this body, but I had quite an interesting quote for what is multidimensional. He said, there's this man called Ishmael Perez who's done a lot of work about multidimensional. He says, according to him, we're here on Earth to integrate spirit and matter and bring our higher levels of consciousness into our physical reality. So we also heal our soul by bringing all parts of our experience together. So we might be thinking about past life trauma, soul fragments, higher dimensional aspects of us, and we're gathering all our qualities and gifts together into one, with the merging of our higher levels and our lower levels. And they say that being here on planet Earth gives us the opportunity to integrate all these multidimensional facets into one body, one consciousness, until we become one with Source or the Creator or God, or however we like to know.
Okay, like that. Okay, that makes sense if it's like fragments otherwise, and now it's being united into you. But
into our bodies, and the body being the temple which holds it all.
But what about the thought about having, you mentioned before, parallel lives, and like if there's a version of me existing somewhere else, then that's not just a fragment, right?
Yes. All the dimensions exist simultaneously. And so they're all going on at once, and we're not usually conscious of the other dimensions that we're operating at. Sort of very enlightened beings will know all their lifetimes, and they can simultaneously know everything because they're omniscient. But for us, I don't want to call us lesser mortals, because we're not less immortals, but we're just less evolved. We're kind of learning that. But basically, the higher our vibration, the more we have access to, they sometimes call it the Akashic records. Our soul has a recording of absolutely everything that's happened to us in all our lifetimes.
You have a quote about that. I noted all aspects of our experience are recorded and held as encoded information in our subtle energy. In energy psychotherapy, we connect with this information in our biofields, often termed thought fields, to release trauma.
That's right. So all the information is in the quantum field. Absolutely everything exists in the quantum. All solutions to all problems are in the quantum field. And our personal light bodies, if you like, our chakras and our subtle energy system, our personal field links with the greater field. So if you do these visualization exercises of expansion, we're practicing expanding into the wider field. But energy is held as information in the field. And what's amazing about energy therapy is we can access that information through something called energy testing. Have you heard of muscle testing?
Yeah, it's what are they called, the people who's doing that?
So you can energy test and you can say, sorry?
I was just wondering. I was just remembering. There's a certain kind of professionals who's doing that, right?
We use that in energy therapy.
You use that in energy therapy too. Yes. Okay.
And so you can by either self-energy test by using an energy testing on behalf of someone else because it's in the field. And there's a diagram in my book that shows the field. And so we can access another person's information because when we're working with someone, we're sharing a field together. So we can energy test on behalf of another person. Or if we're working in person, we can also physically energy test another person by pressing on their arm. And if it stays firm, that's a yes. And if it goes down, it's a no.
Mhm.
But through that method, we can access information in the fields. So we could say something like, there's more than one cause to this trauma. And let's say it's test strong and say the primary cause for this trauma, I need to treat this by clearing a trauma from a previous life, and it goes strong. And so you can energy test, and the pattern, there's a repetition compulsion pattern. So what happens in the present is usually when there's a trauma, it's an exact repetition of what happened in the past. So if the presenting trigger, let's say, is that someone, can you give me an example of a trigger?
Oh, that's so many.
Well, we could say shame. Okay, we can
Yeah,
say shame because that's a
you're right.
really common one.
Yeah.
So, you're at work and your boss really shouts at you and you just want the ground to swallow you up and you have a shame state.
Mm.
So then you can access, there's an earlier cause to this trauma of shame and it goes strong. Oh, yes, it's really strong. And so, and you can say this is an energetic pattern through many lifetimes and it goes strong. So then you come up with a treatment phrase like all the times and ways and lifetimes I've been shamed by people in authority and consequently I lack confidence or something like that. You can come up with a phrase that summarizes the kind of trauma which is in the cells of our being. And then as you clear that through the energy system, either by tapping on the meridians or by going down the energy centers or chakras, you clear that, what we call ill forming trauma out of the cells. And once it's gone, it's gone. And then you're no longer going to recreate that repeating pattern.
Okay, I'm not gonna ask about that because this is actually I did think before we started that it's probably gonna be hard not to go into part two of the book, but it is actually belonging a little bit to the actual practice of energy psychotherapy. This is one of the methods, right? But I am curious about it, and I do have questions for it, but I'm gonna hold my tongue on that. And so I'm gonna take you back a little bit to something you said just before around how 3D is running parallel to 5D. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. But what's interesting about the Earth at the moment is that it's dividing with this shift. The timelines are sort of uh, coalescing into two main timelines, one being 3D and one being 5D. And it's said that we're at a choice point now where we need to choose which timeline we want to be on because what's going to be happening is that there's going to be a divergence. And if you're on one timeline, ideally we choose to be on the 5D timeline, they will separate. And at some point, you'll no longer be able to access the 3D timeline.
Yeah, I'm taking this in, and I'm also feeling like there's a little part of me that want to ask this. What if I want to, but I'm not sure that it's that I can rely on it. I mean, and we have this everyday reality. I guess that's what we can call 3D, right? This is what we see. This is our job. This is making enough money to get by, sort of state. And and then, but what if it doesn't hold true what I think is the 5D? And then it has all of these physical consequences? I know I just have to ask.
No, that's a really good question. Well, the thing is that negotiating reality is something we all need to do. So it's not that we just kind of give up our day job and just sort of float around in the sky being happy bunnies. No, we have to we have to do. I mean, Freud talked about ego as being the reality principle. I mean, the Dalai Lama says we need ego to survive. We do, but it's more that that the ego serves the higher purpose, so that rather than being in service to self in a selfish way, we use that reality principle of the ego to serve the higher purpose. So, our desires to do things is what gives us energy to accomplish things. But it's more that we don't have to be driven by ego in that, ego's full of shoulds and oughts, and I ought to do this and I should do that. And it's very driven and it's really stressful on the nervous system. Whereas when we access the 5D, we're in the flow and we don't have to try so hard. It's much more about being. And it's as though we can pluck things out of the 5D. It's like you look for a solution and then things like synchronicities start to happen. And so rather than you thinking, right, I've really got to plan very hard and work out how I'm going to do this and how I'm going to do that, it's like you call out to the universe, thank you, universe. I'm very grateful for you for providing a solution to this problem. And then something just arrives effortlessly. And that's the thing about 5D, is that it's effortless, it's easy. That's why they use the term grace and ease. You don't have to exert pressure on your nervous system. You can relax. And it's all about trusting the flow. Doesn't mean we don't do our homework and, prepare for things. And, we still work and do normal things, but we're not doing it from a stressed nervous system.
It sounds really easeful and lovely, a lovely state to be in. And you do have, I think, quite a bit of places in the book where you speak about manifesting and how it's, I mean, because talking about manifesting, there are different voices in that, how to do that. But for you, it seems to be that it's already having it. It's that kind of mentality, like already go into that frequency, and then because it's like you have this, where the universe, are you saying the universe are the frequencies that they don't really determine anything? Like it should be this or that, but it's up to your own vibration.
Yes, we attract, our vibration is what comes back to us. So if we put out a feeling of abundance and prosperity and confidence and love, that's what comes back to us. Whereas if we put out lack, and fear, then that's what comes back to us. So it matches the frequency of what we put out.
But another idea could be that there is something that is for your higher good. And yeah, I mean, that could be something you can call like predetermined, but I don't need to label it like that. But just that there is something that is actually for your higher good, and then to kind of manifest that. But where I feel like the way that you've written it, it's more that there is no like right or wrong or anything. It's just that you put yourself into that place vibrationally that you want to go. Did I get that?
Yes, I think we're getting into real subtle points here. It's about intent. Intention comes from the heart, but in the quantum flow, it's about playing with the universe. William Linville calls it dancing with the universe, dancing in the flow. And so it's good from that place. When you're in a place of compassion with an open heart, you naturally want to do beneficial things. You don't have to try to be good. You want goodness for everybody. Love naturally radiates. I think the main thing is you don't have to keep trying so hard. It just naturally radiates. I don't know whether I've answered your question. I think perhaps I
Yes,
haven't.
it's good. It is good. Yeah. Just you saying intention that comes from the heart, then I
It's
felt.
not a cognitive thing, it's a
Yeah.
heart thing. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned before the dog Shen. I'm not sure of the pronunciation here, but
Yeah.
does that lead us maybe to talking about the 9 yanas?
Yes, I'd be happy to talk about those.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've been talking about sort of quantum reality, and really the only reason that I've put the 9 yanas in the book, just as I've also put the map of the chakras in the book, it's about energetic maps of evolution. Because I think often in life, people don't know how do we know what to choose? How do we know what's right or wrong? What guides us on the path?
Yeah.
In sort of Victorian reality, years ago, people went to church, or they went to the synagogue, or they did this or that, and they had their guidelines from the old religions. But in this new era, we're having to go inside ourselves. We can no longer look for the patriarch outside us. We have to find the wisdom from within. But how do we find that wisdom? What helps us develop our consciousness and awareness on the path? And the reason why I put in, well, I would say the chakras is an equally useful model, by the way, but the reason I put in the 9 yanas, which is it's sort of evolution of consciousness in Tibetan Buddhism, is that it describes a process of evolution of our consciousness which is universal. So when I talk about this, I don't want people to think I'm trying to persuade people to become Tibetan Buddhists. Not at all.
Yeah, but this is what I love about that you're taking you're collecting and putting together, integrating many different disciplines and fields, and to make us see what it is we're doing, in a way. Oh, right, it's a map of consciousness, a map of evolution. Right.
Yes, because I think otherwise it can be very confusing. Uh, how do so? Shall I just walk you through the 9 yanas?
Yes.
So I think one of the things about Dzogchen is that it's in the quantum flow, just as I feel energy therapy is in the quantum flow.
And what is Dokshin?
And Dzogchen is known as the king of medicines. It's the apex of spiritual realization, which is beyond mind. It's beyond cognitive mind. It's in the realm of the field, the quantum field, where there's no thought involved, there's no concept, there's no designation. It's completely non-dual. But how do we get there? So the heart-centered space, or zero point, we talked about the heart chakra, helps open us out into that field where we experience a state of simplicity. It's pure awareness. This is the light of our true nature. And when we're in that space, healing just occurs effortlessly. In Dzogchen, they use this quote, like a snake unwinding its knot. It's like it just naturally unwinds. There's no effort involved. It's effortless. And there's a sense of relaxation and joy and lightness. So that's what the quantum flow is, which is the same as Dzogchen. However, how do we get there? Easier said than done. So that's why I thought it might be helpful to talk about Dharma, which in Buddhism, they use the word Dharma, which means truth. And when we follow the path of Dharma, it's a path of truth and discernment. They say that the path of Dharma is about learning how to choose, what to adopt and what to abandon. So the 9 yanas lays out a whole path of different truths at different levels, just like we were talking about the dimensions of 3D and 5D. It's a similar version, only it's talking in Buddhist speak about yanas. So if you like, a yana could be like a dimension in a way.
Okay.
And the point about any spiritual path is that obviously we need ethical and moral principles because they're inherent to any spiritual path. And as we're on our path in life, we're constantly presented with choices. And as human beings, we have free will. So we're responsible for the choices that we make. And how do we choose which forks in the road we're going to take? You know, should I go this way or that way? And I think one of the main things is that whatever fork in the road we take, there's not a right or a wrong, in the sense that each path, each fork we take brings learning, and we learn something from that. So it's all about learning and evolution. And we often get lost on the journey. I've been lost loads of times in my life. You know, we just enter our dark night of the souls and we think, oh my goodness, what on earth's going on here? And we're really lost. And that's part of the path, being lost. But we learn how to change, learn how to discern through walking through this path. And what I'd like to do is go through the actual yanas. So there are, of the 9 yanas, the first 8 yanas are all in the realm of ego, our ordinary mind. So Dzogchen is the 9th yana. So we've got a whole path of 8 yanas to get to before we get to Dzogchen. And they're very useful levels to go through. So these are divided into 3 main yanas. Yana means path or vehicle. It's like a vehicle for arriving at enlightenment, if you like. So Hinayana is the lesser vehicle or the lesser yana. But I don't think it's lesser at all. I think Hinayana is really profound because it teaches us about self-discipline, morality, and ethics. I mean, we have to start somewhere, don't we? And the Mahayana path, or the greater, so the first noble truth of the Buddha in the Hinayana path is to do no harm. So then the second yana, the turning of the wheel, is the Mahayana path, or the greater vehicle. And that noble truth is about to do good to perfection. And that's with compassion as the guiding principle. That's where the Heart Sutra comes in. The Heart Sutra opens us up into the Mahayana. And then the Vajrayana, which is the 3rd yana, is a path of transformation, where we tame our minds again and again, because our minds are very wild and unruly, aren't they? I mean, we're constantly full of mind chatter and all these thoughts, and God knows what goes all over the place. So we need to tame our mind. And it arrives at a non-dual state of pure perception, or heaven on earth. And Dzogchen is the 9th yana, which is the apex of the path, and it's where we arrive at universal consciousness. And it was prophesied by Guru Padmasambhava that this age Dzogchen would be like blazing like the sun, because so many people are plugging into the 5th dimension. Dzogchen is the 5th dimension, basically. And it's the realization of pure awareness beyond mind, directly to source, where we're connected with our souls. There's no concept, there's no thinking. And it's a direct path where we work with our wisdom mind rather than our conceptual mind. They call it non-dual wisdom. And it's beyond any kind of religious doctrine, because it's a natural state. And it's the same as Christ consciousness. And it's been prophesied as heaven on earth or sacred outlook. And it's an embodied experience where we experience the light nature of our being. So there's no belief is required, because it's an experience, it's an embodied experience. So that's Dzogchen. So there are stages in the path, and in Hinayana, it's basically the path of renunciation. It's like we don't know how to manage all our thoughts and emotions. So we just renounce them and we focus inwards on meditation. It's a simple practice of shamatha, which we now know as mindfulness. And the thing about mindfulness is the idea of peacefully remaining. We just sit with ourselves and we let go of the busyness of our mind. We just calm down. And it's like the traditional images of the idea of our thoughts and emotions settle like sediment sinking to the bottom of a glass of water. You know, in those days when they did that, water wasn't very pure. So it was full of all sorts of things. So we're just letting our mind settle. We're minding our own business. We're not worrying about what anyone else is doing. We're just having the discipline to sit with ourselves, which for many people is really challenging, because as soon as you start to sit, you just realize how busy your mind is. It's like our minds go all over the place, don't they? And like actually to settle and just be is quite a discipline. So it's a very simple path of meditation and self-reflection and abstinence, if you like. And in that space, we kind of simply learn how to be with ourselves, which is quite a discipline. Some people find that really, really hard to do, don't they? But it's the time and effort and patience and self-discipline involved provides a really sound spiritual foundation for life. And, you know, without that base, we can't really do any other work because our mind is too scattered. So although they call it the lesser vehicle, I actually think it's the major. I think it's a really important path. And so there's this analogy of the poisonous plant that His Holiness Dujin Rinpoche used to talk about. It's like different antidotes to our negative emotions are applied at different levels. So at this level, it's about renunciation. So there's this idea that people discover this poisonous plant, which is our wild emotions and desires, and they panic because they think it's so dangerous. And this is the approach of this is renunciation, where they just cut down the plant. So that's ego's way of overcoming the ego and the negative emotions, just renounce everything. So in the Mahayana, the awakened mind of emptiness, we open our hearts, we have a glimpse of 5D, the view of emptiness, which is true reality. We realize our Buddha nature, if you like. And it's like we realize that our true nature is of love and compassion and light. And this is a sacred reality. It's a glimpse of emptiness, which shines light on our normal egoic reality. And we sort of suddenly realize how ignorant we've been. It's like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize this is who I really am. You know, all that self-doubt and blame and guilt and, you know, that's nothing to do with me. This is the real me. So it's a real compassionate. We really open and feel compassionate, and we realize that we're all the same. You know, everybody's in the same boat. That's that interdependence. And so it's in that sense we have a sense of the eternality of our consciousness. It's like we're a part of the great expanse, basically. And to cultivate the Mahayana, we cultivate what are known as the four immeasurables. And in David Hawkins' scale, it talks about love and above. And the higher emotions like love, compassion, joy, equanimity are emotions of they're not really emotions, actually. They're wisdom states. So we're guided by cultivating love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And the 6 parameters, which are qualities we cultivate: generosity, discipline, patience, enthusiasm, meditation, and wisdom. So we're working with ourselves, consciously cultivating these things. And we renounce egoic selfishness, because when you have compassion and realize, oh my goodness, it's all this comes from ignorance, that we don't realize who we truly are. You then want to help other beings to open and awaken too, once you've realized your own sense of who you truly are, you think, gosh, I really want to be involved in this path of helping others also. So in the poisonous plant analogy, people discover it and they think cutting it down won't suffice because the roots will grow again. So they provide extra antidote where they pour boiling water on the roots to prevent it growing. This is known as the realization of emptiness. Applying that to the antidote is the antidote to ignorance, because ignorance is the root of ego and negativity. And that's such a simple thing, isn't it? It's just ignorance. It's not there's anything wrong with us. We're just ignorant. We don't realize that our true nature is the expanded state.
Yeah.
And we start really feeling compassionate for ourselves. So the Vajrayana or Tantra is the sacred outlook or pure perception. And we go one step further. And the third yana is the path of transformation. And it's symbolized by the lotus, which is a power of humanity to transform our energy, our emotions into enlightenment. So, one of the things about lotuses is that they grow out of muddy swamps. And it's just like the human emotions, all our, yucky emotions. Out of that, we can purify and transform. And out of the mud of our distorted, confused emotions, we can transmute what are known as the 5 poisons, or pride and arrogance and jealousy and envy and desire and anger, and into the wisdom counterparts, the 5 Buddha families. So rather than renouncing, we work with the energy to transform it. So you're allowed to enjoy your path. That's why Tantra is the path of joy, the path of enjoyment, because we can enjoy our experience on the path. We haven't got to cut them down or renounce them. We get into them and experience them fully and work with them. So it's very kind of quite a more, what can I say, volatile and exciting path, shall we say.
Yeah.
So, but we transmute these energies because our emotions are nothing but energy, just energy in motion. And so we trust in life as the path, because in the sacred outlook, which we arrive at through the view of Tantra, we come to the realization of 5D, or pure perception, which is the clear sight where we know that we're all divine beings. Everybody, plants, animals, the earth, everything is divine. We're all part of God. We're all part of Source. So, you stop judging people as good or bad. You see all beings as divine beings. It's an amazing perceptual path. And there's a lovely, lovely, which I find incredibly helpful, teaching in the Vajrayana path known as the 5 perfections. And this is where the lens, when we see everything as perfect, it's a sacred outlook where, there's the perfect teacher. So the teacher isn't necessarily a person. It can just arise as life circumstances, which show us something to learn on the path. Then there's the perfect teaching. And that's the knowledge and wisdom that we gain from life's experience. Whatever the situation, there's a perfect teaching for us to learn from it. Then there's the perfect place. We can guarantee that we learn what happens in the right place. And then there's the perfect assembly. So it means that the people that constellate to teach us these things, they're all the perfect people. And the perfect time, which is that things happen at the right time in order for us to learn. So it's a very profound, I love the 5 perfections, because when you trust in that, you really know that everything that happens to you is part of the path. And you haven't got to judge yourself and beat yourself up and say, oh my God, I made a mistake. And oh, how terrible. It's like, oh, right, thank you. I'm learning. Thank you for this learning. I'm learning something that I need to learn. So we stop beating ourselves up.
Ruthie,
What?
so much.
Am
Oh,
I overwhelming you? Do you want me to stop there?
you're not overwhelming me, but it is one of the longest answers potentially that I've had. But
Is it?
it is a big question, right? I'm talking about the nine yanas, so it is a big question. And then blending in the analogy of the 4 ways to handle poison plants you have in the book you were talking about here, and then now also this with the perfect 5. Did you say?
Yes, the five wisdoms. But we haven't even got to Dzogchen yet. But I won't go into Dzogchen more because it's too long. But basically, what we're doing is we're getting to a place beyond mind where we just rest in the unobstructed space. And the peacock lands and dances with joy when it sees the poison, and it consumes the poisonous plants, and it creates beautiful peacock plumes.
That's
That's
the last way, the best way, the
yeah,
most aligned way to handle poison plants is to inject it,
eat it.
eat it.
And it's like the peacock eats poison and it creates beautiful plumes.
Mm.
So I
I,
think we can only enter that through a very subtle states of consciousness. It's like in Christianity, they say it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. If we're inflated by ego or pride, we can't get through the gap. So Dzogchen involves very, very subtle state of consciousness.
okay, I have a few questions.
Yeah,
So way back in the beginning, you were saying that the first yana is that there you're still in ego reality, right?
yeah,
And then you had this what do you call that? This the saying that goes with it is do no harm.
yeah,
So I was just like, oh, so that's actually do no harm is way down in the beginning of the journey.
yeah.
It's like it's so logical, but even that principle is something that we use a lot of effort around to work together in a society, right? How do we do no harm to other people? How do we come together and make policies so that we do no harm? And I mean, even in practicing astrology, this is a principle: do no harm. Also, hopefully, be helpful, right? But it's kind of good to remember always, like, do no harm, because as an astrologer, you can get all excited about all the symbolism and kind of forget the human being sitting right there,
Yes,
and you actually do harm.
yes,
Excitement. So I was just like, oh, that's the first principle, but it takes us a while to
yeah,
integrate that.
yes. But isn't it helpful to have a principle of do no harm?
Yeah,
Do
that's
no harm, do good to perfection, tame this mind again and again.
yeah, yeah. What did you say? Do know? What did you say about perfection?
Do good to perfection. I mean, basically, do your best to do good. Do no
Do
harm, do good, and tame the mind.
in the mind. Yeah. Mm. So when you talk about being connected to our true nature, is that then Dakshin?
Yeah.
Okay. So not all the steps along the way. Self.
Well, yeah, we have a little glimpse along each way. So we have a little glimpse of egolessness in Hinayana, and they're just increasingly subtle states. In Mahayana, the Heart Sutra, you have an awakened state. They're just different levels of awakening. Ego's present right until the final levels, really a little bit. But
Mm.
it's interesting that in the final states of Dzogchen, and my teacher, who I was very, very fortunate to meet, Dinka Khyentse Rinpoche, they talk about this thing called the wearing out of phenomenal reality, where when you really got to the top level of clearing, you have so little ego that you would, they'd have to be minded by their attendants, because otherwise, if they sat out in the balcony meditating, they wouldn't mind if it was snowing, sunny, raining. They'd just sit there in equanimity. They could get frostbite or get sunstroke. They wouldn't notice because they'd beyond phenomenal reality. And the example that was given about my late teacher was he was on the plane. He used to rest in a state of non-duality 24/7. And he was on a plane and the attendant gave him a drink and mistakenly put a whole thing of mustard in his cup of tea because he thought the mustard was honey. Now, most of us, if we had tea full of English mustard, which is really hot, we would splutter and we go, ugh. This teacher, because he lived in such total non-dual reality where there was no judgment, it's called one taste, where you don't divide things up into good and bad. Anyway, so he just drank the tea with complete equanimity. Absolutely, no sort of
what a litmus test. I mean, that's really okay. He pulled that off, then he must be enlightened.
He'd been meditating in caves for about 30 years.
Yeah, okay. Oh man. Okay. So Ruthie, I'm trying to decide what the last few questions are going to be for this one. There's so much wisdom already. I want to get the most of it. I think I've been hearing you associate this to also Christ consciousness, so that people who would have that background would not feel this is about becoming a Buddhist or anything. And so maybe to talk a little bit about that, because you have this beautiful story in the beginning of your book. And yeah, I really hope people are gonna get the book and read all of that, because I mean, I can have reservations around when people are writing about their life, because sometimes it can be a little bit boring, but you've had a very eventful life. And it's so relevant for the whole book. So I've really been glad to read that.
Thank you.
So maybe we could talk about that. So you are Sagittarius, and that is the theme about submitting to religious rules, if you want to call it that. It could also be educational rules. And so you talk about the paradigm of hierarchical authority. And so that, because this is also a shift has happened in many religious institutions and spiritual communities, right? So back in the days, of course, you must have experienced some of that, where you had to submit and the price was, well, your true voice in it. You call it also to give your power away with a false self-compliance. Yeah, can you speak a little bit to those experiences?
Yes. Well, I think that growing up in a traumatized household, it's very easy for us to become codependent and have developed what Winnicott called the false self, where we're not really being ourselves. We're just doing what we think others want us to know or say, because we're too traumatized and frightened to be who we actually are. And I think that first, choosing the path of joy, that chapter is really about my journey to learning to find my voice, my true voice. And it took me a really, really long time to actually own it and trust it and say what I felt and thought. I mean, I was like a mouse in the first part of my life. I didn't dare speak my truth at all. And I think it was probably because when I was a child, I was very innocent and I would blurt things out. Being a Sagittarius, we shoot our arrows without thinking about where they're going. And then, my family would be absolutely horrified because I'd blurt out truths that you weren't supposed to say. So I kind of learned to go inside. And then the whole thing about people pleasing. So many people that have been traumatized learn to live life by people pleasing, sort of trying to think what the other wants them to say and doing what the other wants because they don't feel confident enough to own their own view.
You can say coming from that traumatic background, you're kind of set up to the toxicity that can be present in a religious community or under religious rules.
Yes, yes, yes.
Where you actually not taught to be yourself.
Well, I think that the religious community that I was involved with, unfortunately, it turned out that the leader had a narcissistic personality disorder. I'm not talking about people like Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche, who was on a totally different level. This was just a more ordinary teacher who just abused his power over people. And the whole religious community became like a cult. And it was only probably because I was both a therapist and also because I was made a trustee. I think because I was made a trustee of the organization, it was a large international organization. I realized I had a responsibility. I don't think I'd have had the confidence to speak my truth against this teacher if I hadn't had that responsibility on behalf of others, because it's much easier to do it for other people than to do it for yourself. So it was by speaking out and then becoming a pariah in the community. They thought I was terrible. How dare I, speak out against the teacher? That I had to, I abandoned my path. I didn't abandon my path, but I abandoned that path.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't aligning with my truth. But then I had to find the truth inside myself. I couldn't look outside myself for answers. And there's a saying that really we are our own masters. But actually, when you're brought up in Vajrayana and Dzogchen, the master is everything. So it always feels like you're being egotistical to find the master in you, And it's so sort of subtle. It's like, am I on an ego trip or is this my true heart speaking here?
Yeah, how do we discern that?
Well, and it is through our hearts we discern it. Because I kind of knew, I mean, when abuse happens, it's wrong. And so it's like learning to really listen to one's heart and trust it, trust the truth in your heart. Even, there's no one else to tell you that you're right or wrong. You have to trust your own heart, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, it just really resonated with that, with your story and the way that you you give words to these experiences, because I have religious trauma. I use that phrase a lot from growing up in both dysfunction and religious setting. And so how it comes up for me now is every time that I'm in an education and in any training, and it's kind of, I'm laughing because it's now in this age I'm choosing these trainings myself, but I still tend to getting a little bit triggered when I have to learn something. So I'm navigating that. Therapy is a part of that. I have to take the education that happens into therapy, even though what I'm training to be is a therapist. So I'm having that meta level as well. But actually, I also wanted to share with you, and I hope you don't mind, but actually, the first psychotherapy, trauma therapy training I did, I only lasted for 9 months, but that was really energy psychotherapy. It really was. But the way that they used it, and this is part of the point, that you can misuse anything, right? The way that they used it, the tapping and all of these ideas about how to sense into the body, it um I mean, it works for a lot of people, so I'm not gonna say, be above and say this is I mean, this is for yeah, we all have different paths, right? But I felt that it was misused because the way that you explain it in the book is that we all come with our different needs and ways
Yes.
of doing it. And what I experienced was there is one way to do it, and that is you have to sense into your body in this way. And what happened to me was we did these groups several times a week, and I would just sit there with a pain in my jaws because I couldn't come into my body in the way that we were taught to. It's like the method didn't work for me, and I just would sit there again and again and again, and that has also brought me some hardship, just coming out of that and kind of realizing, okay, there are other ways of healing, and I'm not just stuck here because I can't go into my body. And so I've had, I just wanted to mention that even energy psychotherapy, you can misuse that, and
Absolutely.
it can
Very
be,
much so.
yeah, can
You
be.
can misuse. I'm so sorry you had that experience. I really am.
Mm,
We do have people on the course that I teach on. One of the people that did it had a similar experience. I think sometimes teachers can be rather didactic, and we have to find our own way with these things, don't we? And otherwise, it's awful because you feel that you're not getting it right when it's
yeah.
just that there's a misattunement going on in the way it's being taught, and that maybe you have another means to access stuff. And I'm really sorry that it was misused for you.
But this is also part of my path in a way, and it's something that shows really clearly in my own astrology. With I can say it's Pluto conjunct my South Node in Scorpio. So there's something about finding myself in that underground level where about, yeah, below the surface, where people don't realize what's going on, but it's kind of being projected onto me. Or there's something is going on energetically where I'm seeing something as I see the limitations of what's going on. And I may pick up on what other people unconsciously are not owning.
Yes.
And I don't make a whole thing about it. I just leave. I just
I really sympathize with that. That's very traumatic. It's sort of learning how to trust one's own perception and not take the blame on yourself
yeah.
if what you're perceiving doesn't resonate in a very nice way. You may well be seeing someone else's shadow or their misappropriation of tools or whatever, but it's something to do with being able to see that, but not turn it against yourself in some way that you're somehow the bad one.
Exactly. Oh, you're spot on. You're spot on. But I just wanted to mention this, but in your book, you're very clear about how it's connected to compassion. And that's what you've said here, being heart-centered. And so if you really had that component in the way that you teach it, then how could this then happen, right? It wouldn't be able to happen, because then you would be attuned to each student and the needs of that student, right?
Yes, yes. Because there's something called traumatic invalidation, which I think is one of the most profound traumas to the self, when your own perception is invalidated.
Oh, yes.
You're seeing things a certain way and everyone else is seeing it differently. And you feel isolated and scapegoated by the group because you're living in your own world and your own perceptions are invalidated. It's so traumatic.
Exactly. That's what we're talking about here. Yeah.
But you can, the good news is that energetically you can treat that as a trauma and clear it so that your ego boundaries in a good way become stronger, your energy boundaries, so you're no longer so affected by the field of other people's projections.
Interesting.
If it's any consolation, I can really resonate with what you're saying, because I used to get traumatically triggered all the time when I first started doing these trainings.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely my journey is to be less involved when there's something that I don't agree with today, then okay, make a note of that and then still be present with it. I think it is also an effect of not having owned your voice. So when there is a structure and they are quite rigid in a school, then of course it goes into that wound for me more easily than others.
Yes.
That's part of it.
Bless you. Thank you for sharing that. I do appreciate you saying that. But that is how trauma happens in the field, isn't it? And one of the things about doing energy clearing is that we clear the field, and we can also create stronger, what do we call, energy boundaries, so that when trauma comes in, it doesn't impinge so directly into our wounds, and we're able to have a layer of what would I call it? So it bounces off us rather than going into us. But I can very much identify with what you're saying, and that level of sensitivity, especially when it's a Pluto. Yeah, hard, very painful.
Thank you, Ruthie. I'm just like looking down here at my notes if there's something we wanted to have here in our first conversation. There is this question about awakening the new DNA strands. Yeah, maybe could we?
I could just say something about that. Yeah. Well, I suppose that one of the things about us as human beings is that we've actually, I mean, there are various, Judith Sartori wrote about it a lot, but our genetics are multiple. You know, we've been engineered over thousands and thousands of years. And there's this guy, Ishmael Perez, who talks about humanity being genetic royalty, because we have many, many components in our human DNA. You know, we've been gifted with DNA. Now, this is where we start getting slightly far out, and you may or may not feel free to disagree. But like you know, they talk about we're stardust. You know, we come from the stars, and there are many components to our DNA. And what happened is that apparently we got dumbed down, and we originally had 12 strands of DNA. And, you know, most people now consider that we've just got 2 strands of DNA, and that the other strands are just junk DNA. That's what scientists do. Have you come across that idea?
Not until your book.
Okay. And so, but during this new earth, this new dawn, what's happening is that there's this incredible, very high frequency photonic light. It's like a plasma light, which is bathing the planet. Have you heard of the Schumann resonance?
I think you have to explain that
The
too.
Schumann resonance is it's like kind of measuring the frequencies that are pouring onto the planet. And
Right.
over the last few months, it's been going off the scale because the levels of high frequency light have been so strong. That's why lots of people are exhausted, or they either can't sleep or they want to sleep all the time. But because our bodies are having to absorb these very fine frequencies of light and kind of basically accommodated. But this is part of the planet awakening, because as the light touches us, our being, our field, it's waking up these dormant codes of the sort of asleep DNA. It's waking them up. And so people are opening up more strands of DNA. It said that we could awaken 12 strands of DNA or even more. And when we're fully functioning, that will awaken many, many gifts like intuition, healing capacities, telepathy, sort of more psychic kind of levels of consciousness. So that's what's happening. And lots of children that are being born today are waking with several strands already activated. I mean, it's said we've actually got the potential for up to 144 strands of DNA. I don't know. That sounds pretty wild to me, but I mean, at least we're waking up more strands. And have you heard of Greg Braden? He
Yes,
he
absolutely.
he sort of worked on DNA and discovering how it's built in sequences. And one of the things that he discovered is the layers of the DNA that we have, that there's a numerical code which he worked out was 1563. And when that's translated into words, the words that come out are God eternal within the body.
God eternal within the body.
Our DNA is aligned with God frequency. So really, awakening our DNA is part of the process. By the way, I had another chapter in my book about this, but that also was not included.
Okay. Okay.
Like the new human,
Yeah.
as we evolve from Homo sapiens to Homo luminous, we're awakening our light bodies. And so this process of the light coming and awakening our DNA helps us to evolve spiritually and come into the body of light. It's sometimes some people call them Merkabahs. It's like the personal energy field around us.
That it would be luminous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, that's what this transition is about over the next, we're going apparently into the golden age, 1,000 years of light, where we're becoming more one with our light beingness. But it's a gradual process. We're just at the beginning.
It is beginning. Yeah.
But it is wonderful. It's good news for humanity.
It is good news. And to have a book like yours, it's so important. And what my hope would be is that students in therapy would read this book, right? To have that as part of the curriculum,
Oh,
because
thank you. That's a
yeah,
lovely thing
this
to
is
say.
putting together so many of what is already going on out there, but they may not define it as energy psychotherapy. And when they don't define it as that, they don't know what's in that same family. And that's interesting. That's why I like to place it. Oh, okay, we can call it that, because then that opens up for so many more ways of working with. Well, I mean, even when I mentioned internal family systems, I'm sure that there would be different voices saying if that's energy psychotherapy or not. But I mean, I think it's reading your book, it's hard to deny, because that is really bringing in shamanistic tools and the whole understanding of
Absolutely.
healing
Yeah.
and rituals. And so I'm pretty sure that it goes under there. But then,
They're all forms of energy. Yeah.
yeah, and putting that into that understanding would then expand, right, our whole view of what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And of course, I've hardly mentioned Freud and the unconscious, but the other aspect of it is, the quantum flow is the same as the energy of the unconscious. Freud called it the royal road of the unconscious because there's so much wisdom in the unconscious. And Jung, also in his visionary journeys that he went on, he kind of paved the way for us to know that we can all go on our spiritual journeys of enlightenment because he experienced these visionary states. As he sort of led the way, really, and we've been catching up with him ever since.
Yeah, yeah. We've been catching up and expanding on his work, as I understand it. Just a quote again from your book is you say that a significant trauma of our age is our disconnection from soul.
Yes.
Actually, the trauma of the age is, and that means that the healing is then let's get connected to the soul again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my paper to see if there's anything. Yeah, I think I want to mention this quote as well, where you say, one measure you use to check if I'm still being driven by duty and a stressed nervous system is to inquire if my energy is moving forward with enthusiasm, inspiration, and joy. So you can kind of test it like that. Am I in joy and enthusiastic, or am I doing this because I kind of have to?
It's quite a simple test, but it's very effective.
It's very Sagittarian. It's very Sagittarian per nature. The whole thing about that your path is joyful, that's very Sagittarian. And from my astrological perspective, that's perfect because we are supposed to live out the highest of these archetypes to find joy. So yeah, this is Sagittarian idea. I didn't speak so much about your chart, but I think it feels fulfilled here, doesn't it? It feels like a good place to end. And let's come back to the second part of the book and talk about all the things that we didn't today.
Oh, thank you so much for interviewing me. I really appreciate it.
I
And I'm
appreciate.
sorry if I went on too long when talking about the 9 yards of Buddhism.
I'm really happy for it because it's wisdom right there. So and it's your fire energy, right? There's so much to learn and to explore. So no, I'm not at all sad about that. So thank you for everything you shared.
Thank you so much for interviewing me. I'm
Really
really,
good company, by the way. You're really good company. I feel really relaxed and just myself, and you have a good effect on people.
oh, thank you. So do you. It's been very comfortable to be interviewed by you. And equally, I offer the
Parasangati
same compliment to you. It's been very easy, hasn't it?
Bodhisoha
Yeah, it has.
Gate Gate Paragati Parasamgati Bodhisoha 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 Gate Gate Paragati Parasamgati Bodhisoha